Have you ever been in a movie theater where the audience starts a round of applause when the movie ends? If so, what movie was it? Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. That midnight showing was my favorite theater experience. Cosplayers, legitimately funny commenters, and a couple of kids sang a song they wrote about Lotta while we waited for the projector to get fixed. I've never heard a legitimately funny commentator in a movie theater. What kind of comments do you remember? A round of applause? That's nothing. I was at the midnight showing of Rocky IV on opening night, in one of the biggest theaters in suburban Detroit, working class town. Height of the Cold War, Rocky taking on the Soviets. It was mayhem. During the final fight sequence, there was a guy in the row in front of us standing on his seat yelling "Duck him up, Rocky!" Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. At the screen. He was almost drowned out by the rest of the audience cheering. It was a wild night. At the other end of the spectrum was when I went to see Peter Jackson's WWI documentary They Shall Not Grow Old. Most of the audience were old enough to have had grandparents or even parents fight in that war. At the end of the movie, stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop. Endgame opening night. My opening night watching it was pretty crazy. My theater became a stadium once Cap wielded Mjolnir and every Avenger entered onto the battleground. I just really wished I got to relive my cinema experience. Avengers Assemble, that's when everybody in the theater I was in went nuts and I damn near shed a tear mayo. It was the most applause I've ever heard in a theater and this was about 3 days after it had premiered too. It was crazy. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows 2. Most of the audience also cheered when Bellatrix was blown to pieces. Not my daughter. UB. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. The packed theater I was in definitely cheered as well. Great moment / call out. The first time I saw it there was someone that yelled, "Get her." It was the only line I was hoping and praying made it into the movie. Such a satisfying scene. Exclamation mark. Not at the end, but when I was watching The Force Awakens my family the audience clapped and yelled when Han Solo walked in. What about the other bit with him in it? I'm pretty sure everyone was silent then. It wasn't a round of applause. Exactly. But I went to a midnight showing of Infinity War, and the mood when the credits rolled was like nothing else. It was about 3 in the morning on a weeknight, and maybe 30 people had turned up, and not one of them got up from their seats. Despite the fact that by rights they should have been pretty eager to get home to bed. No one moved. It was like the entire audience was holding its breath. I mean, sure. Anyone who goes to see an MCU movie at midnight knows well enough to stay for the end credits sequence. But there's still usually people gathering their coats and finishing their drinks. This was just like everyone in the room had been punched in the gut and didn't know quite how to deal with it. Not before or since have I ever had that shared sense of what the duck. After seeing a movie, I remember leaving the theater and a line was formed outside the theater room's doors for the next showing. Everyone was silent except for the people in line. I heard one girl express "Why does everyone look so sad?" Apostrophe. It's something how everyone was so respectful about spoilers for I Went Egg. Even on the internet. The Dark Knight. Deadpool 2. Sonic the Hedgehog. Ah yes, my favorite trilogy. I saw Black Panther in Oakland. There was applause when the movie started. Came here to say this. I saw it at Grand Lake. Cats. The entire front row must have been high as duck. It got a standing ovation from everyone in the theater. Most fun I've had at a movie ever. Terrible movie. Terrible musical. Probably clapped because it was finally over. Lol. Independence Day. Just past midnight July 4th. 1996. Yep, standing ovation with cheers and whoops in my little hometown. To be fair, a large portion of the audience were high schoolers. But it was wild. That's standard in some countries, including Puerto Rico. It's also standard to clap as a passenger when your plane lands, which was a bit disconcerting the first time. We used to do the plane thing only if it was a good landing. Haven't heard it in a long time, except when we landed in a torrential thunderstorm with crosswinds. Yet it was the smoothest landing I've ever felt, and that only got a few claps. This is just an older thing from back when you got on a plane you didn't have 100% chance of survival. Saving Private Ryan. There were 2 rows of veterans from WW2 behind us. It was an emotional experience. Exact opposite experience for me when I saw it in the theater. There was absolute silence from the audience when it ended. Everyone walked out without saying a single word to anyone else. I feel it would have been the same if the veterans weren't there. When it showed the flag at the end they all stood up and saluted. Many of them were crying. First time I encountered this. A reissue of Southwestern episode 4. It was in the 80s. Clearly I was in the minority. I was just a small kid and really confused about PPL clapping. Did they do that in the 80s? I remember the special editions in 1997, but I don't recall episode 4 being re-released in theaters in the 80s. Very regional, especially in California. This was a re-release before Empire Strikes Back. I was living just outside of LA. Based on the way they were dressed and what I know now, it was a total fan event. I didn't know this at the time. My oldest sis predicted this would be the new Rocky Horror. Guess she was wrong. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, not at the end, but at the Leap of Faith part, it was just something that everyone started clapping at. That was a pretty epic part. That whole movie is amazing. Grindhouse. Remember that absolutely awesome double feature of Tarantino and Rodriguez? Even in my small town it got a standing ovation at the end. I got up to go use the bathroom during the intermission with all the fake trailers. Right as the one for Thanksgiving was wrapping up. Rose from my suite just before it cut to the guy ducking the turkey with the severed head on it. And that image completely ducked up my coordination. I went tumbling onto the floor, choking on laughter. Soda spilled all over my dumbass. My 80-year-old mother started clapping at the end of Inglourious Basterds. I read somewhere that a dude took his veteran grandpa to see that movie. The grandfather screamed hallelujah at the end. Endgame and Star Wars The Force Awakens. I hadn't felt the rush of being in a theater until I saw those movies. People were shouting, crying, laughing out loud, making jokes, cheering the characters on. It was amazing. It felt like a family that came together for the duration of the movie. At the end we all stood up for a round of applause. I thought for sure I had seen my final Star Wars movie when I went to see episode 3 on opening night in 2005. The shared elation of a packed theater when the opening crawl started for The Force Awakens was something else. Lots of applause at the end of Return of the King as well. It wasn't at the end, but years ago, when I saw Stephen King's A Mist in the theater. Everyone applauded loudly when Mrs. Carmody was shot dead. I saw SE7N in the theater and people cheered when Brad Pitt shot the bad guy. That was a twisted moment all round. Watching Endgame in theaters. A bunch of people started cheering and clapping not just for the end, but also the reveal of Cap being able to wield Mjolnir in the scene where all the female Avengers wail on Thanos. I was sitting near the front row with my friend. At the end with Iron Man. The absolute silence except for the sound of noses sniffling was palpable. I could tell there was hardly a dry eye in the theater. Superman, the first movie. Star Trek Second, The Wrath of Khan. Empire Strikes Back. First stunned silence, then clapping and cheering. When the final Harry Potter came out, I went to a showing that played part 1, then bang on midnight part 2 came out. People clapped at the start and end of part 2 and cheered and clapped at specific parts. It was a real good crowd of fans. For a lot of us, that was an end to a love affair with HP that started with the first book as young children. Having that visualized on the big screen marked the end of a chapter of my childhood, though I was well into my 20s by then. Same. I was talking to my girlfriend about this the other day. Watching Harry Potter, since the first movie came out in the cinema, every few years a new one would come out, and it was like going back to school after summer break. You would see all of the younger HP cast had aged, have new haircuts and got taller, and it was like seeing old friends again. I remember closing the last book when I finished it and had this overwhelming sense of this is it. No more, and it was pretty sad. The only saving grace was we still had the films to come out. I couldn't even hear the Hammer Cap v Thanos fight because people were absolutely losing it. Also, assemble every single person in the theater, lost it during this scene. It was beautiful and perfect. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.